Hey guys, Corinne here. I'm really excited to be with you for this month's episode because we're covering a topic that's super close to my heart. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and so our turn has decided to cover rape culture and its heavy role in our society. We're also going to get into some fun stuff with sex education and how to have communicative consent with partners. However, I do want to start this episode off with a trigger warning because we're going to be covering sensitive topics about rape and sexual assault. If that's a trigger for you, which I totally understand as a survivor myself, feel free to check out our activist spotlight this month where Bianca sits down with Sarah and Kareem from the Beirut Syndrom. So what is rape culture? According to Wikipedia, rape culture is a society in which rape is pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes around gender and sexuality. Behaviors normal in a rape culture are trivializing rape, victim shaming, refusal to acknowledge widespread rape, and not acknowledging the harmful implications of sexual violence. The thing is, rape culture is getting talked about a lot more lately, which is great because rape is pervasive and we need to work together as a community to end rape culture. However, we usually focus in on one story when it comes to talking about rape and sexual assault survivors, one that everyone can believe and empathize with. That story being the perfect rape, if you will. It usually involves the narrative of a young, white, cisgender woman who gets violently attacked by a much stronger cisgender man who is unknown to her. And yes, this rape happens often. However, much more often, actually 82% of the time, the attacker is known to the victim. So when we ignore this fact, and the fact that trans and gender nonconforming folks are 5 times more likely to get raped than cisgender women, and 21 times more likely to get raped than cisgender men. When we ignore the fact that queer women are 3 times more likely to get raped than straight women, and gay men 15 times more likely to get raped than straight men. When we ignore the fact that 1 in 5 men are raped in their lifetime. When we ignore the fact that 25% of the women living in America who identify as Native American will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. And just under half of the women living in America who identify as Black will experience rape in their lifetime. When we ignore these narratives, when we silence these stories, what we're doing is telling survivors that their experience is not valid. Sexual violence is so normalized that we're blind to it unless it's laid out to us in the most obvious of ways. That perfect rape narrative I mentioned earlier. If someone's experience strays from this at all, we as a society try to find a reason that they are lying or somehow at fault for what happened to them. That is the core of rape culture. We don't question the validity of burglary victims or victims of any other crime. So why is it that rape victims face such harsh judgment? So now I want to go over what I think the root of the problem is here. Sex education.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die.
When we're taught sex education in school, if we're taught anything at all, it starts with a really negative connotation. But sex is a pleasurable thing. So why are we taught so much shame and negativity? Well, it's really complicated and a lot to go over, so for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to condense the material a little bit and give you some healthy tips about how to have conversations around sex, sexuality, gender, and consent. It's all about positivity and communication.
Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about sex.
I believe that if we were able to change the conversation to be more focused around sex positivity, that the current rape culture we live in would be way less pervasive. When sex ed ignores sexual orientations outside of heterosexuality and gender identities outside of cisgender identities, we're leaving out whole communities of young people and not giving them the tools that they need to have conversations around sex in a healthy way. If we were able to be more open and honest about these conversations, young people would feel more comfortable exploring their sexual and gender identities. They wouldn't feel stigmatized and ashamed about who they are. Our sex ed often limits conversations around scenarios of married couples and those who are trying to have children. If that's what you believe in, that's super wonderful, and we support you. However, when we put these limitations on, we're forgetting about people who have sex outside of these scenarios. Our sex ed should be all-encompassing so that everyone can have sex when they're ready in the healthiest, smartest, and safest of ways. The conversation shouldn't lead our youth to believe that their desires are dirty or somehow something to be ashamed of. Sex is positive, healthy, and, well, fun, and you can have beautiful connections with people through sex. But everyone in every scenario needs to be able to have the communication tools to be able to get there. So, how do you have conversations about consent?
I don't want you to stop anywhere.
Oh. Oh. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it.
I suggest taking the time to talk to your partner before you get into bed. Maybe do a yes, no, and maybe list with them. Take time to tell them what's an enthusiastic yes for you, a maybe you might want to try it, and a definite no. And it's okay if you don't know what these things are for you yet, but just be honest and open with your partner and let them know that. It's also really important to talk about STDs and the last time that you were tested. STDs need to be destigmatized so that it's easier to talk about if you are positive. But this is really just the beginning of a conversation about communicative consent. We suggest you always check in when you're with a new partner or when you're trying something new with a partner that you've already been with. And just remember that when it comes to consent, enthusiastic yes means yes. Assumed consent is not consent. If you're a survivor of sexual assault or rape, and you need someone to talk to, please email us or reach out to RAIN, a national organization that works to support survivors. We stand with you, all of you. You are more than your body.
Hi everyone, so here at Our Turn, as much as we're dedicated to sharing the youth perspective, we want to try to get an international perspective as much as possible as well. So for this episode, we're going to go all the way to Holland via Skype to talk to our friend Britt to learn more about Holland's sex education program. So let's get to it. Hi Britt!
Hey!
How are you?
I'm really good, thank you.
Alright, so Holland's sex education program has been in the news a lot because they start their sexuality education program, as they refer to it, as young as kindergarten. So tell me about that.
When we're really young, they, well, let's just put it this way, they don't shy away from questions about, like, sexuality or, well, I think questions about the actual sex come later than kindergarten, but anything about, I don't know, why does he have a penis and I don't, like that kind of questions.
Right.
Parents and also kindergarten teachers, like, they just answer everything you ask them.
I read that it's all about having open and honest conversations, not just about sex, but gender identities and positive relationships. So, I mean, tell me more about that.
Well, yeah, that comes also, like, when you grow up, like, that sort of information you get, like, more and more, because I think kindergarten, like, that's when it starts, but it's not when you get all the information, because you're just not, like, interested in any of that. But if you have questions, of course they're answered. But I mean, our first, like, actual sex education comes when we're like 12, 11 years old. So at elementary school, and that's when you get like structured classes about, like, how everything works. When you, like, really start to learn about sex and also how sexual relationships should be. So what's a healthy relationship and how can you practice safe sex, that kind of stuff. That's what you get in, like, the last 2 years of elementary school.
So would you say that Holland's program has a much more positive approach? Because here things are kind of taboo and we don't, I mean, if you've seen the Mean Girls clip, it's pretty telling of the program. Don't have sex or you will die. So,
Yeah.
what would you think?
Well, I think the message on sex here is really positive. Like, basically what they tell you in high school, because in high school sex education is mandatory by law. Basically what they tell you is how to practice safe sex, how to have healthy, equal sexual relationships, and anything about that. The message is to have sex, but do it safely and do it like when you want to do it, not against your will or whatever, or when it's not, when it doesn't feel right. So that's what they tell you, and I think the underlying thought about that is that when you give enough information about how it should be and how you could do it, then young people, but also like when you grow older, you will think more responsibly about how you want your sex life to be and how you should do it. So I think it really helps giving a positive image about sex.
Wow,
like it's not something you have to shy away from or you will die.
Right, yeah. No, and I would have to say that statistics show it's working. I mean, Holland, out of all the other European countries, and the U.S., teens have sex much later compared to the other countries. And actually, you are ranked one of the lowest countries as far as teen pregnancy. So clearly,
that's really cool.
There's something to be learned from having a positive, honest, open conversation around sex education. I think one of the biggest fears, especially I've been feeling here in the U.S., is that if we promote sex education earlier, then kids will have sex sooner, and but it's actually kind of showing the reverse. If you equip youth with how to have healthy sex when you're ready, then that's what they're going to wait for,
Yeah, exactly. It's like when you know if you just know what would happen if you have sex, and if you have sex unsafe or unresponsibly, like whatever you start, I think if you don't know the consequences, you'll start testing them or something. And I just feel that if you give enough information about things that young kids just don't know anything about, then they'll be informed and they don't have to find it out for themselves.
There you have it. So it looks like there's a lot to learn from Holland, and maybe more countries can follow their lead. Thanks for watching. Thanks, Britt! Welcome to Our Turn. This is our next activist spotlight. This time we are featuring Beirut Syndrome with Kareem and Sarah. It is an online media platform that has been documenting the protest movement in Lebanon and quite a few other far-reaching topics such as police brutality. And we're really excited to have them here. So let's just get right to it. Kareem and Sarah, thank you. Okay, so just tell us about Beirut Syndrome.
Beirut Syndrome was basically what inspired us to start Beirut Syndrome was the conversations we had about different issues in Lebanon that weren't being tackled by the mainstream media or weren't going into proper depth, and as well as the fact there were a lot of voices that weren't being given an opportunity to be amplified in Lebanese media. So we want to try and create discussions about issues and bring these topics to the forefront of daily conversations between people.
Our Turn is all about promoting youth activism, youth media, and so we're interested in what are the challenges you have faced as young activists, as young journalists, against mainstream media, the powerhouse that it is.
So basically, because we are not licensed, it's kind of dangerous to be on the streets reporting and taking pictures and talking to people, especially when the police are being brutal during the protests. So in Lebanon, there's this law where you can't, you have to be a licensed journalist to be able to report. So we're not employed by any of the mainstream media outlets. So we're doing this on our own. We can't register ourselves as a media outlet, and that's why it's dangerous for us. For example, there's this friend of ours who got beaten up by the police just because he's a journalist, but he doesn't have a license.
Right.
So that's one of the main challenges. The other one is financial. We have our daily jobs, a 9-to-5 job. We're not making money out of Beirut Syndrome. It's ad-free, self-funded. So we think that if we had more time, we could produce a lot more than what we're doing right now.
Of course, but you guys are already producing such great content, so
you.
don't worry. So what is the importance to you of independent grassroots media, again, led by youth activism?
Well, in the context of Lebanon's let's say TV, right? You have your state television channel, which is just very dull and dry and just does what is officially appropriate for the government. And then all the other television channels that are licensed are all owned by different political parties, or they're owned by corporate entities that support particular political parties. So we're very limited in Lebanon on where we get our news. I think that we have a gap that we can fill with Beirut Syndrome. I think it's just the fact that we need to just give straight up information on what's happening on the ground, especially with the protests where, we're actually on the ground and we are there for hours talking to different people, seeing how things develop over a long period of time. Whereas the mainstream media, television for example, will bring their vans for a bit, shoot a few minutes of footage and leave, and then interpret in whatever way they possibly want to, without talking to ordinary people, without seeing what people actually think. They might talk to, maybe two, give them like 10 seconds and they're very angry, but nothing of substance, So that's kind of what I think grassroots media plays a role. With other cases in the protests in the Middle East in the past, even though I hate kind of putting all the Arab countries together under the Arab Spring because we're all very different, grassroots media played a huge role, especially when they dealt with a completely monopolized media by the state and providing information to the outside world, to other people, to organizations, to give them more information. So we hope that we could do that with Beirut Syndrome.
Right, no, definitely. I think that this on-the-ground reporting, citizen journalism and whatnot really is kind of like changed the game. I don't think we'll ever go back to just depending on watching our TVs and everything like that. So it's really interesting to study it, to work with it. I really think that we're kind of just at the beginning of this wave that's about to happen, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. So it's really cool that you guys you're a part of the ripple. So I attended a workshop that you guys were hosting earlier, and you talked about Beirut Syndrome discussions, and basically, you can speak more on it, but for our viewers, it's where you started these public events in person that were geared towards problem solving, having a discussion.
Yeah, so in the age of Facebook and Twitter and also social media, people are always commenting on each other's posts, and then the thread goes on and on for hours and maybe days and sometimes weeks of people saying you're right and you're wrong and this is what I think. But we wanted to take this discussion offline, and we wanted to talk to people to learn more about their points of view, other than just saying you're wrong and you're right and I think that this works and this doesn't work. We wanted to get people together in a horizontal setting. So we're not only getting experts to talk and discuss solutions, but we're also getting ordinary people, students, activists, experts. We're getting everybody on the table so that they can discuss things and come up with solutions and interesting ideas, giving them a platform to discuss, to be creative, to ask each other questions, to start a conversation on why you're wrong and why am I right, and how can we come to a middle ground.
That's great. Yeah, no, I think the media landscape, the way it is, it's so much content, and we're not having those conversations, and that was a big initiative for creating Our Turn. Was okay, so we can just say this is terrible and dang the world, but what are we going to do about it? And so I think that this kind of coming into the public and doing it horizontally, that's great, and we will probably copy you with that.
Great.
What advice would you give to young activists who are wanting to pursue citizen journalism, or even just making an online media platform?
This is really simple. I guess it's kind of general, but just be very patient. We live in a very fast-paced society. You know, everything just it's done in a snap. You know, everybody's connected, and just be patient. It takes months, years sometimes, just to get yourself there. But you know, just to keep going. And if you really feel passionate about what you're doing, just keep going and listen to criticism, and then always do your research, and always just, you know, take a step back and evaluate. You know, these are really important things, not just for starting an online platform, but just for anything.
Making most of what we have, like one tweet goes a long way. Go to the streets and take pictures, and if something's interesting, think about it, discuss it, ask people about it, and you can build a lot of things with very limited resources.
We live in an interconnected world, and unfortunately, a lot of it is focused on the big corporations and on the higher classes of society. But we can be more interconnected as well, just from the bottom, in a more horizontal way, and we can learn so much from each other, especially in grassroots journalism, where we deal with limited resources, we deal with challenges, we can't snake our way in. So, you know, let's keep sharing ideas, and let's keep sharing information, let's keep supporting each other.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're really building this network, and I think it's going to be a force to be reckoned with.